Most people believe they are opaque. They assume their intentions are hidden, their motives private, their inner life sealed behind words, manners, and social roles. This belief is comforting and completely false. Human beings leak information constantly, not through confession, but through tone, rhythm, posture, moral language, and emotional reflex. This is the foundation of how to read anyone instantly. The mistake is not that people are unreadable. The mistake is that observers look in the wrong place. When Friedrich Nietzsche studied human behavior, he did not listen for sincerity. He listened for compensation. He understood that speech is rarely an expression of truth. It is far more often a correction for inner imbalance. People do not speak to reveal who they are. They speak to stabilize what they fear losing. This single idea is enough to dismantle the illusion of privacy. To read someone instantly, you must abandon the idea that people are trying to tell the truth. Instead, you observe what their behavior is trying to protect. Every individual is governed by internal pressure, unresolved desire, suppressed aggression, fear of insignificance, hunger for validation. These pressures do not stay hidden. They surface in predictable ways: excessive certainty, moral outrage, nervous humor, over-explanation, loud virtue. Sudden cruelty disguised as honesty. Each is a psychological symptom, not a personality trait. This is why most people are easy to read, and why most never realize they are being read. Nietzsche rejected the surface-level approach to psychology. He did not ask, "What does this person believe?" He asked, "What weakness requires this belief?" That shift, from content to cause, is what allows instant perception. You stop hearing arguments and start seeing needs. You stop reacting to emotion and start identifying its function. Consider how quickly you can identify insecurity when someone speaks too long about their success, or resentment when someone frames cruelty as moral clarity, or fear when someone hides behind rules, credentials, or group consensus. These are not subtle tells. They are loud signals, misinterpreted as personality instead of pressure. This documentary exists to sharpen that perception. How to read anyone instantly does not mean guessing thoughts or manipulating reactions. It means recognizing that behavior is not random, it follows structure. And Nietzsche spent his life mapping that structure, not for control, but for clarity. He believed that most human interaction is theater performed for survival. People perform competence to hide fear. They perform kindness to avoid conflict. They perform certainty to suppress doubt. Once you understand this, interaction slows down. You are no longer hypnotized by presentation. You are reading the script beneath it. The reason this feels dangerous is because it removes comforting illusions. It shows that identity is less stable than people pretend. That moral certainty often masks inner chaos. That confidence and weakness can look identical unless you know where to look. Nietzsche's psychological truths are not optimistic. They are diagnostic. They reveal why people cling to beliefs, why they attack certain traits, why they submit or dominate without conscious intent. And most importantly, they show that self-knowledge is rare, not because it is complex, but because it is uncomfortable. To read others instantly, you must accept that people do not act from reason first. They act from drive. Reason arrives later as justification. This is why conversations repeat the same patterns across cultures, professions, and eras. Why the same personalities reappear under different labels. Why power, resentment, and fear speak the same language everywhere. By the end of this documentary, the goal is not to make you suspicious. It is to make you precise. To recognize that when someone speaks, reacts, judges, or emotes, they are revealing something more reliable than their words, their internal hierarchy of strength and weakness. And there is one final discomfort Nietzsche forces on the observer. If people are easy to read, it is because you are too. Every principle that allows instant perception outward also applies inward. You are broadcasting drives whether you intend to or not. Your moral stances, emotional reactions, and conversational habits are being interpreted by others who may never explain what they see. This is where Nietzsche's psychology becomes unavoidable. Reading others is not a trick, it is a responsibility. Because the moment you understand how visible human nature is, you lose the excuse of ignorance about them and about yourself. And that is exactly where we begin. If you want to understand how to read anyone instantly, you must first discard the most common psychological mistake, taking people at their word. Nietzsche did not believe words were windows into truth. He believed they were curtains, drawn to conceal pressure, not reveal essence. This is why his psychology begins beneath language, beneath intention, beneath explanation. At the center of Nietzsche's framework is a single premise. Human behavior is driven by forces, not ideas. People do not adopt beliefs because they are true. They adopt beliefs because those beliefs serve an inner need: protection, elevation, revenge, belonging, control. Once you understand this, words lose their authority, they become clues. Nietzsche referred to these underlying forces as drives, instinctual pressures that shape perception long before conscious thought intervenes. When someone speaks, reacts, or judges, you are not witnessing a conclusion. You are witnessing a symptom of which drive is currently dominant. This is the first and most important rule for reading anyone instantly. Ignore what is being argued, observe what is being defended. Consider certainty. People who are deeply certain feel no need to convince. They speak sparsely, often ambiguously. Their statements do not seek agreement. In contrast, those who lack inner stability over-explain, repeat, and escalate. The intensity of their language is not confidence, it is compensation. Nietzsche saw this pattern everywhere. The louder the declaration, the greater the internal doubt it tries to suppress. This is why Nietzsche distrusted rhetoric, morality, and emotional display. Not because they were evil, but because they were rarely neutral. They were instruments of balance for an unstable psyche. To read someone instantly through this lens, you stop categorizing personalities and start tracking energy direction. Is this person expanding outward or contracting inward? Are they seeking validation or asserting position? Are they reacting or initiating? Reaction is always revealing. People react fastest where they are weakest. A calm person reacts slowly because nothing urgent is being protected. An insecure person reacts immediately because delay feels like danger. This is not speculation. It is observable in tone, timing, and posture. Nietzsche understood that modern psychology would one day describe this in scientific language, but he arrived there intuitively. He noticed that resentment shapes entire worldviews, that fear disguises itself as morality, that weakness often speaks in the language of virtue. This is why Nietzsche's psychology is so effective for instant reading. It does not require long observation. Drives surface immediately under pressure. A single interruption, disagreement, or challenge is often enough to reveal them. Watch what happens when someone is contradicted. Do they grow curious or hostile? Do they ask questions or attack character? Do they withdraw or escalate? Each response is a diagnostic signal. You are not learning about the topic of disagreement. You are learning about the person's internal structure. Nietzsche warned that most people mistake surface behavior for character, politeness for goodness, aggression for strength, silence for emptiness. In reality, these are often inversions. Silence frequently indicates surplus, no need to prove. Aggression often signals scarcity, an attempt to force recognition. This is how Nietzsche's lens strips away illusion. He also rejected the idea that people consciously choose these behaviors. Drives act first, consciousness follows, justification arrives last. When someone says, "I believe this because," Nietzsche heard, "I need this belief because." This shift is what allows you to read anyone instantly without cynicism. You are not assuming malice. You are observing necessity. And this is where most people resist Nietzsche's psychology. Because it removes moral comfort. It suggests that many virtues are survival strategies, that many convictions are compensations, that identity is less chosen than inherited through temperament and experience. But for the observer, this clarity is stabilizing. When you understand that behavior flows from drive, you stop personalizing reactions. You stop being manipulated by emotional display. You stop mistaking volume for authority and passion for truth. You are reading structure, not story. This section is foundational because every psychological truth that follows depends on this reversal. Words are effects. Drives are causes. Beliefs are outcomes. Pressure is the origin. To read anyone instantly is not to be clever. It is to be patient enough to look one layer deeper than language. And once you adopt Nietzsche's core lens, drives over words, human behavior becomes remarkably consistent, predictable, legible, and impossible to unsee. If there is one place where people reveal themselves instantly, it is not in desire, ambition, or fear. It is in morality. Nietzsche treated moral language not as evidence of goodness, but as psychological disclosure. To him, morality was never neutral. It was a confession spoken in abstract terms. This is why morality is such a reliable tool for reading anyone instantly. Most people believe moral statements describe the world. What is right, what is wrong, what should be done. Nietzsche understood something more uncomfortable. Moral statements usually describe the speaker. They reveal what the person lacks, fears, resents, or cannot achieve. This is not an attack on ethics. It is an observation about psychology. When someone speaks passionately about what others must or should do, they are rarely discussing universal truth. They are expressing internal tension. The stronger the moral urgency, the stronger the unresolved pressure behind it. Nietzsche noticed a pattern that repeats endlessly. People condemn most fiercely what threatens them personally, not what is abstractly dangerous, but what exposes their own weakness. This is why moral outrage is so loud and so selective. It does not arise from strength. It arises from vulnerability seeking protection. To read anyone instantly, listen to what they moralize. Do they obsess over fairness? Often a signal of perceived inferiority or historical loss. Do they moralize success? Often resentment toward those who achieved what they did not. Do they moralize restraint and humility? Often fear of competition or exposure. Nietzsche called this psychological mechanism resentment. Not anger, but a slow-burning hostility that cannot express itself directly. Instead, it transforms into virtue. It calls itself righteousness. It disguises itself as concern for others. This is why Nietzsche distrusted moral certainty. Not because all morality is false, but because moral language is too often weaponized by the weak to constrain the strong. Not consciously, but instinctively. For the observer, this insight is invaluable. When someone frames their opinion as a moral necessity, pause. Ask silently, what does this belief protect them from? Exposure, failure, responsibility, competition. That answer will tell you more about the person than their entire argument. This is exactly how to read anyone instantly using Nietzsche's psychology. You stop debating content and start decoding motivation. Strong individuals, Nietzsche observed, do not need excessive moral framing. Their values are embodied, not advertised. They act, they choose, they move on. They do not demand universal agreement. They do not need to convert others to validate themselves. In contrast, moral missionaries need an audience. Their certainty requires witnesses. Their outrage requires reinforcement. This is not strength. It is dependency. Notice how often moral language escalates when someone feels ignored, or challenged, or irrelevant. The moral tone sharpens as the internal threat grows. This escalation is not about justice. It is about regaining psychological footing. Nietzsche also warned about a subtler trap, mistaking gentleness for goodness. Moral softness can be just as revealing as moral aggression. Excessive compassion, constant forgiveness, and refusal to judge can signal not wisdom, but avoidance, a fear of conflict disguised as virtue. Again, this is not universal. Nietzsche was precise, not cynical. He distinguished between strength-based values and weakness-based values. The difference lies not in the value itself, but in the emotional energy behind it. Does the value feel calm, grounded, unapologetic, or tense, defensive, insistent? This is the tell. To read someone instantly, you do not ask, "Is this value right?" You ask, "Is this value relaxed or strained?" Relaxed values come from surplus. Strained values come from pressure. This principle applies everywhere: workplaces, relationships, politics, families. The person who constantly invokes morality is often unconsciously negotiating status. They are not just stating what is right. They are asking to be protected, elevated, or obeyed. Nietzsche believed this was inevitable in herd societies. When direct power is unavailable, moral language becomes the currency of influence. Understanding this does not make you immoral. It makes you literate. You stop being intimidated by outrage. You stop being seduced by virtue signaling. You stop mistaking accusation for authority. And you begin to see the human pattern beneath the moral mask. This is why morality, in Nietzsche's psychology, is one of the fastest ways to read anyone instantly. It is not a shield, it is a window. And once you learn to look through it, people reveal themselves without realizing they ever spoke. To read anyone instantly, begin with how much they speak and why. Nietzsche's first psychological truth is brutal in its simplicity. Speech often compensates for inner lack. People do not talk to express strength, they talk to stabilize weakness. This does not mean silence is always power or speech is always insecurity. Nietzsche was more precise than that. He observed pressure. Where there is inner surplus, there is no urgency to explain. Where there is deficit, language rushes in to fill the gap. This is the first truth. The intensity of speech reveals the intensity of need. Watch how people react when they feel unseen. Their sentences grow longer. Their tone sharpens. Their explanations multiply. They repeat the same point in different forms, not to clarify, but to convince themselves. What you are hearing is not confidence. It is self-reassurance spoken aloud. This is how to read anyone instantly without guessing their thoughts. You are not interpreting content. You are measuring compensation. Nietzsche noticed that those with real authority often speak indirectly. They leave gaps. They allow ambiguity. Their words do not chase agreement because agreement is not required for their inner equilibrium. In contrast, those who lack internal stability crave closure. They push for consensus. They demand acknowledgement. Silence feels like rejection to them. This creates the first observable divide. Speech that invites versus speech that insists. The second truth follows naturally. Over-explanation signals vulnerability. When someone explains themselves excessively, especially without being asked, it is rarely generosity. It is defense. The speaker is preempting judgment because they already feel exposed. Their explanation is a shield raised too early. Nietzsche saw this pattern in moral discourse, professional identity, and social status. The person who constantly clarifies their role, values, or intentions is unconsciously signaling uncertainty about them. Stability does not narrate itself. To read this instantly, pay attention to timing. Does the explanation arrive before challenge? Does justification precede accusation? If so, you are witnessing fear of invalidation, not transparency. This is why Nietzsche distrusted people who spoke in absolutes. Always. Never. Everyone knows. These phrases are not statements of truth. They are anchors, verbal attempts to pin reality down before it shifts. The third truth deepens the pattern. Tone reveals hierarchy orientation. People who feel internally subordinate often raise their volume to simulate dominance. People who feel secure lower theirs. This is not cultural, it is biological. Loudness is a substitute for position when position is uncertain. Notice how arguments escalate. The person who feels losing ground becomes emotional. Their speech speeds up. Their gestures expand. Their language becomes moralized or personal. The calm speaker is not winning because they are right. They are winning because they are not threatened. This is exactly how Nietzsche read human interaction. He did not ask who was correct. He asked who was pressured. and pressure always speaks. This is why debates reveal more than discussions. Under disagreement, compensation becomes visible. You can watch someone's internal structure crack in real time, not through insults but through urgency. Do they interrupt? Do they restate points already addressed? Do they appeal to authority prematurely? Each is a tell. To read anyone instantly, you must become sensitive to excess. Excess words. Excess certainty. Excess emotion. Nietzsche understood that human beings overproduce precisely where they are unstable. This applies equally to silence. Not all silence is strength. Some silence is paralysis. But Nietzsche distinguished between quiet that feels settled and quiet that feels constricted. The former is spacious. The latter is tense. Again, you are not judging morality or intelligence. You are diagnosing structure. When someone speaks calmly under pressure, they are not necessarily superior, but they are not compensating. When someone floods the space with words, something inside them is being defended. This truth is uncomfortable because it implicates everyone. You cannot observe compensation without becoming aware of your own. The moments when you explain too much, when you rush to clarify, when silence feels unbearable, Nietzsche would say, that is where your weakness speaks. And this is the value of this psychological truth. It is not to dominate others. It is to recognize signals before they manipulate you, emotionally, socially, morally. Speech is not just communication. It is regulation. Once you see that, you stop being hypnotized by eloquence. You stop mistaking verbosity for depth. You stop confusing passion with power. And you begin to read people instantly, not by what they say, but by how urgently they need to say it. If speech reveals compensation, judgment reveals something deeper. Nietzsche believed that when people judge others harshly, they are rarely describing the world. They are disclosing their inner conflict. This is why judgment is one of the fastest ways to read anyone instantly. The fourth psychological truth is direct. People attack what they cannot integrate within themselves. When someone reacts with disproportionate criticism, mockery, or contempt, the target is almost never the true issue. The reaction is too intense because it is touching an unresolved part of the self. What cannot be accepted internally is projected outward and punished externally. This is how Nietzsche read hostility, not as strength, but as leakage. Observe how often judgment carries emotional charge. Sarcasm, disgust, moral superiority. These are not neutral assessments. They are defensive maneuvers. The speaker is not evaluating. They are distancing themselves from something they fear resembling. To read anyone instantly, ask one question when you hear strong judgment. Why does this bother them so much? The answer is rarely ideological. It is personal. The fifth truth deepens the pattern. Envy disguises itself as critique. Nietzsche understood envy as one of the most denied emotions in human psychology. Few admit it, most moralize it. They transform envy into narratives of injustice, corruption, or incompetence. The emotional charge remains, but the story becomes virtuous. This is why Nietzsche paid attention not to what people praised, but to what they resented. Resentment is a psychological fingerprint. It reveals comparison, perceived inferiority, and blocked ambition. Watch how people speak about success they do not possess. Is the tone curious or dismissive? Do they seek understanding or undermine credibility? Do they analyze or belittle? Belittlement is not critique, it is self-protection. This does not mean every criticism is envy. Nietzsche was careful here. The difference lies in proportionality. When judgment outweighs the actual threat, you are witnessing projection. To read this instantly, notice repetition. People return again and again to the same targets when something inside them remains unresolved. Their language loops because the internal conflict has no resolution. The sixth truth completes the triad. Moral condemnation often masks impotence. When direct action is unavailable, judgment becomes a substitute. Nietzsche observed that people who lack the power to change their situation often change the narrative instead. They redefine their inability as virtue. What they cannot do becomes what should not be done. This is one of Nietzsche's most uncomfortable insights and one of the most useful. To read someone instantly, listen for this inversion. Does the person condemn traits they lack? Do they frame avoidance as wisdom? Do they moralize restraint that was never chosen? This is not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It is psychological survival. The mind seeks coherence. If achievement is blocked, it must be reinterpreted as corruption. If desire is suppressed, it must be reframed as immorality. Judgment becomes a way to regain dignity. Nietzsche did not hate these people, he understood them. But he also warned that judgment, when unchecked, becomes corrosive. It spreads resentment. It punishes vitality. It turns weakness into ideology. For the observer, this insight is protective. When someone judges you harshly, the instinct is to defend yourself. Nietzsche would advise something else. Observe instead. Their judgment is not about you. It is about the relationship between them and what you represent. This is why reading people instantly reduces emotional entanglement. You stop internalizing attacks that were never truly aimed at you. It also sharpens self-awareness. You begin to notice your own judgments, the topics that irritate you, the traits that provoke disproportionate reactions. These are not random. They are signposts pointing inward. Nietzsche believed self-knowledge begins where judgment ends. When you stop condemning and start understanding the drive behind condemnation, clarity replaces bitterness. This is the deeper value of this psychological truth. Not superiority, but detachment. Once you see how judgment reveals self-hatred, you stop mistaking hostility for authority. You stop confusing condemnation with insight. And you stop being pulled into conflicts that are not yours. People reveal themselves most clearly not when they praise, but when they attack. And if you know how to read that attack, you can understand them instantly without saying a word. Nietzsche believed that one of the fastest ways to read anyone instantly is to observe their relationship with obedience. Not obedience as behavior, but obedience as instinct. Whether someone submits, resists, or needs rules tells you more about their inner structure than their opinions ever will. The seventh psychological truth is this: people reveal their rank psychology by how they relate to authority. Some individuals seek rules instinctively. They are comforted by structure, titles, and clear hierarchies. Others experience rules as suffocation. They follow them only when necessary and abandon them when they no longer serve. Nietzsche did not frame this morally. He framed it biologically and psychologically. To read this instantly, observe reactions to constraint. Does the person relax when procedures are defined? Do they become anxious in ambiguity? Do they constantly ask for permission or validation? These are not signs of respect. They are signs of dependency. Nietzsche saw obedience as an internal orientation, not a learned habit. Those with a subordinate psychology feel safest when responsibility is externalized. Rules relieve them of decision-making. Authority gives them cover. They are not weak in the everyday sense, but they are structured to follow. This is not an insult. It is a pattern. The eighth truth follows naturally. Those who crave authority often enforce it on others. People who are deeply obedient rarely admit it. Instead, they become rule police. They correct behavior. They cite procedures. They invoke norms. This enforcement gives them a sense of borrowed power. By defending the structure, they feel elevated within it. To read this instantly, watch who reaches for rules during conflict, who appeals to policy instead of principle, who hides behind "that's just how it's done." Nietzsche recognized this as a psychological exchange, submission in return for protection. The individual gives up autonomy and receives moral certainty in exchange. In contrast, individuals with a dominant internal structure treat rules instrumentally. They follow them when useful, bend them when necessary, and discard them when obsolete. Their compliance is tactical, not emotional. This distinction is crucial for reading people instantly. Two individuals can follow the same rule for entirely different psychological reasons. One follows because they need it, the other because it serves them. The ninth truth completes the triad. Rebellion can be just as submissive as obedience. Nietzsche was suspicious of loud rebels. Those who define themselves in opposition are still dependent on what they oppose. Their identity requires an enemy. Their defiance is reactive, not autonomous. To read this instantly, look at emotional charge. True independence is calm. Reactive rebellion is angry, performative, and predictable. It still orbits authority. It just chooses the negative position. This is why Nietzsche dismissed many revolutionaries as inverted conformists. They hated the structure, but needed it to exist. Without it, they would lose their identity. For the observer, this insight is stabilizing. When someone loudly proclaims their independence, ask, independent from what? If their behavior revolves around rejection, they are still tethered. Autonomy does not announce itself, it simply acts. This is how Nietzsche read hierarchy, not through titles or roles, but through emotional orientation. Who feels safe under authority? Who feels threatened by it? Who uses it? Who ignores it? To read anyone instantly, observe how they handle responsibility. Do they seek cover? Do they shift blame upward? Do they dissolve under freedom? Freedom reveals structure faster than constraint. Nietzsche believed that most people fear freedom more than oppression. Freedom exposes capability or lack of it. This is why obedience is often chosen, not imposed. Understanding this protects you. You stop mistaking compliance for loyalty. You stop confusing rebellion with strength. You stop overestimating those who hide behind structure. And you become aware of your own orientation. Do you seek rules or use them? Do you obey out of necessity or strategy? Do you resist because you are free or because you are reactive? These questions are not philosophical, they are diagnostic. And once you learn to read obedience as a psychological signature, human hierarchies become legible at a glance. Not because people confess, but because they cannot help revealing how they relate to power. Most people believe emotions happen to them. Nietzsche believed something far more unsettling. Emotions often happen for them, not consciously planned, but strategically expressed. This is why emotional display is one of the fastest ways to read anyone instantly. The 10th psychological truth is this: emotion reveals what a person is trying to secure. Anger, sadness, outrage, enthusiasm, none of these are random when they appear in social space. They are signals. They change the behavior of others. They create pressure, sympathy, fear, or alignment. Nietzsche understood that emotions are part of human negotiation, even when the individual believes they are simply being honest. To read this instantly, ignore the story and watch the effect. What happens in the room after the emotion appears? Do others retreat, comfort, submit, apologize? If an emotion reliably produces an outcome, it is functioning as a tool, whether the person knows it or not. This is why Nietzsche distrusted emotional excess. Not because emotions are bad, but because exaggerated emotion often indicates reliance. The person needs the emotional reaction to move others because direct authority or clarity is missing. The 11th truth sharpens the lens. Repeated emotions form a pattern of control. One emotional outburst may be spontaneous. Repeated outbursts in similar situations are structure. If someone always becomes angry when challenged, sadness when held accountable, or offended when questioned, you are not witnessing vulnerability, you are witnessing conditioning. Nietzsche would say the environment has been trained. To read anyone instantly, ask, which emotion do they reach for under pressure? That emotion is their lever. Some use anger to silence opposition. Some use victimhood to avoid responsibility. Some use enthusiasm to gain approval. Again, this is not moral judgment, it is observation. Nietzsche believed that modern society rewards emotional display. It confuses expression with authenticity, but expression can be performative without being false. A person can genuinely feel an emotion and still unconsciously use it to shape outcomes. This is where most people get confused. They think strategic means fake. Nietzsche meant something subtler. Emotions evolve because they work. The 12th truth completes this set. Emotional restraint signals surplus. People who do not need to influence others emotionally do not escalate. They allow discomfort to exist. They do not rush to resolve tension. This calm is often mistaken for coldness, but Nietzsche saw it as a sign of inner sufficiency. To read this instantly, observe tolerance for silence and tension. Can the person sit with misunderstanding without rushing to explain? Can they absorb disagreement without emotional flair? Can they remain steady when others escalate? This is not emotional repression. It is emotional independence. In contrast, those who cannot tolerate tension externalize it. They emote to restore balance. Their emotion is not weakness, but it is dependence. This distinction matters because emotional displays often override reason. They hijack attention. They force response. If you cannot read them accurately, you will be pulled into dynamics that were never about truth. Nietzsche warned that emotional contagion is one of the oldest tools of influence. Long before language, emotion coordinated groups. It still does. The loudest emotion often sets the frame, regardless of accuracy. To read anyone instantly, you must resist being hypnotized by feeling. You acknowledge it, but you do not surrender to it. You ask what function it serves. This also turns inward. Notice your own emotional reflexes. The moments when emotion rushes out before thought. The situations that reliably trigger the same response. These are not accidents. They are patterns shaped by past outcomes. Nietzsche believed self-mastery begins when emotion is observed rather than obeyed, not suppressed, but understood. This is the defensive edge of this truth. Once you recognize emotions as strategic signals, they lose their power to blind you. You stop confusing intensity with importance. You stop mistaking emotional pressure for moral obligation. And you begin to see human interaction for what it is, not chaos, but choreography. Emotions move people. Those who understand this, consciously or not, shape environments. Those who do not are shaped by them. Reading this difference instantly is not cruelty, it is clarity. Kindness is one of the most misunderstood human signals. It is praised automatically, trusted instinctively, and rarely examined. Nietzsche did not reject kindness, but he refused to romanticize it. He believed that kindness, like every other behavior, must be read through its origin, not its appearance. This leads to the 13th psychological truth. Kindness reveals its source under pressure. There is kindness that comes from surplus, an overflow of strength that does not require return. And there is kindness that comes from fear, an attempt to avoid conflict, rejection, or loss of standing. The behaviors may look identical on the surface. The psychology beneath them is not. To read anyone instantly, observe what happens when kindness is not reciprocated. Does the person remain steady or resentful? Do they withdraw quietly or escalate emotionally? Do they moralize their generosity after the fact? Resentment after kindness is the tell. It reveals that the kindness was transactional, not free. Nietzsche saw this not as deception, but as unacknowledged dependency. The 14th truth sharpens this distinction. Excessive kindness often seeks safety, not connection. People who are afraid to assert boundaries often substitute niceness. They soften language. They avoid disagreement. They prioritize harmony over truth. This behavior is often rewarded socially, but it carries a psychological cost. Nietzsche observed that such kindness is frequently a survival adaptation. It reduces immediate threat, but erodes self-respect over time. The individual becomes externally pleasant and internally constrained. To read this instantly, watch for boundary behavior. Can the person say no without explanation? Can they tolerate being disliked? Can they remain kind without becoming submissive? When kindness collapses under conflict, it was never strength-based. Nietzsche also warned against confusing politeness with depth. Politeness can be empty. It can mask avoidance. The person may appear agreeable while silently accumulating resentment. When it finally surfaces, It is often disproportionate and misdirected. This is why Nietzsche distrusted forced harmony, not because conflict is good, but because suppressed conflict distorts perception. The 15th truth completes this set. True generosity does not advertise itself. People who give from strength do not keep score. They do not remind others of what they've done. They do not use kindness as leverage. Their actions are quiet because their identity does not depend on recognition. To read this instantly, observe memory. Does the person remember every favor? Or do they forget them easily? Memory reveals intention. This distinction matters because kindness is often used as social currency. It creates obligation. It establishes asymmetry. The giver gains moral leverage over the receiver, sometimes without admitting it to themselves. Nietzsche believed this form of kindness was more dangerous than open hostility. Hostility declares itself. Strategic kindness entangles. For the observer, this insight is protective. When someone is kind to you, the instinct is gratitude. Nietzsche would add one more step: observation. Not suspicion, but awareness. You note whether the kindness increases freedom or reduces it. Does it come with expectation? Does it create guilt? Does it limit your ability to disagree? If so, the kindness is not neutral. This truth also turns inward. Many people pride themselves on kindness without examining its cost. They give to avoid confrontation. They help to feel needed. They accommodate to feel safe. Nietzsche would say, that is not generosity, it is strategy without awareness. Understanding this does not make you cruel. It makes you honest. You stop confusing softness with virtue. You stop mistaking accommodation for maturity. And you stop allowing guilt to replace consent. Kindness, when it comes from strength, expands both people. When it comes from fear, it binds them. Learning to read that difference instantly is not cynicism, it is discernment. Kindness is one of the most misunderstood human signals. It is praised automatically, trusted instinctively, and rarely examined. Nietzsche did not reject kindness, but he refused to romanticize it. He believed that kindness, like every other behavior, must be read through its origin, not its appearance. This leads to the 13th psychological truth. Kindness reveals its source under pressure. There is kindness that comes from surplus, an overflow of strength that does not require return. And there is kindness that comes from fear, an attempt to avoid conflict, rejection, or loss of standing. The behaviors may look identical on the surface. The psychology beneath them is not. To read anyone instantly, observe what happens when kindness is not reciprocated. Does the person remain steady or resentful? Do they withdraw quietly or escalate emotionally? Do they moralize their generosity after the fact? Resentment after kindness is the tell. It reveals that the kindness was transactional, not free. Nietzsche saw this not as deception, but as unacknowledged dependency. The 14th truth sharpens this distinction. Excessive kindness often seeks safety, not connection. People who are afraid to assert boundaries often substitute niceness. They soften language. They avoid disagreement. They prioritize harmony over truth. This behavior is often rewarded socially, but it carries a psychological cost. Nietzsche observed that such kindness is frequently a survival adaptation. It reduces immediate threat, but erodes self-respect over time. The individual becomes externally pleasant and internally constrained. To read this instantly, watch for boundary behavior. Can the person say no without explanation? Can they tolerate being disliked? Can they remain kind without becoming submissive? When kindness collapses under conflict, it was never strength-based. Nietzsche also warned against confusing politeness with depth. Politeness can be empty. It can mask avoidance. The person may appear agreeable while silently accumulating resentment. When it finally surfaces, it is often disproportionate and misdirected. This is why Nietzsche distrusted forced harmony, not because conflict is good, but because suppressed conflict distorts perception. The 15th truth completes this set. True generosity does not advertise itself. People who give from strength do not keep score. They do not remind others of what they've done. They do not use kindness as leverage. Their actions are quiet because their identity does not depend on recognition. To read this instantly, observe memory. Does the person remember every favor? Or do they forget them easily? Memory reveals intention. This distinction matters because kindness is often used as social currency. It creates obligation. It establishes asymmetry. The giver gains moral leverage over the receiver, sometimes without admitting it to themselves. Nietzsche believed this form of kindness was more dangerous than open hostility. Hostility declares itself. Strategic kindness entangles. For the observer, this insight is protective. When someone is kind to you, the instinct is gratitude. Nietzsche would add one more step: observation. Not suspicion, but awareness. You know whether the kindness increases freedom or reduces it. Does it come with expectation? Does it create guilt? Does it limit your ability to disagree? If so, the kindness is not neutral. This truth also turns inward. Many people pride themselves on kindness without examining its cost. They give to avoid confrontation. They help to feel needed. They accommodate to feel safe. Nietzsche would say, that is not generosity, it is strategy without awareness. Understanding this does not make you cruel. It makes you honest. You stop confusing softness with virtue. You stop mistaking accommodation for maturity. And you stop allowing guilt to replace consent. Kindness, when it comes from strength, expands both people. When it comes from fear, it binds them. Learning to read that difference instantly is not cynicism. It is discernment. If speech reveals compensation, judgment reveals resentment, obedience reveals hierarchy, emotion reveals strategy, and kindness reveals origin, then suffering reveals worldview. Nietzsche believed that nothing shapes perception more deeply or more quietly than unresolved pain. This makes suffering one of the most reliable ways to read anyone instantly. The 16th psychological truth is this: people do not see the world as it is, they see it as their suffering has trained them to see it. Two people can experience the same event and interpret it entirely differently, not because of intelligence, but because of pain history. One becomes cautious. Another becomes bitter. One becomes precise. Another becomes hostile. Suffering does not automatically ennoble, it filters. To read this instantly, observe how a person interprets neutral events. Do they assume threat where none is present? Do they anticipate betrayal without evidence? Do they frame ambiguity as danger? These are not personality quirks. They are protective adaptations. Nietzsche believed most people mistake these adaptations for truth. They say this is just how the world is, when what they mean is, this is how the world felt when I was hurt. The 17th truth deepens this. Unprocessed suffering hardens into ideology. When pain cannot be metabolized, it seeks structure. It turns into beliefs about people, systems, morality, and fate. The individual may not remember the original wound, but the worldview remains shaped by it. To read this instantly, listen for absolutism. People are always. You can never trust. This always ends badly. These statements are not conclusions. They are scars speaking. Nietzsche was particularly alert to bitterness disguised as wisdom. The person speaks calmly, even eloquently, but their conclusions are consistently constricting. Life becomes smaller, narrower, more suspicious. This is not maturity, it is defensive closure. In contrast, Nietzsche observed that some individuals refine their suffering. They do not deny it, but they do not universalize it either. Their perception becomes sharper, not narrower. More selective, not more hostile. To read this instantly, watch curiosity. Does the person remain open to being wrong? Do they ask questions instead of making pronouncements? Do they allow exceptions to their beliefs? Suffering that has been integrated produces humility. Suffering that has not produces certainty. The 18th and final truth completes Nietzsche's psychological map. People protect their suffering more fiercely than their happiness. This is difficult to accept. But Nietzsche believed that suffering becomes identity when it remains unresolved. Letting it go would mean losing coherence. The pain explains too much. It justifies too much. It gives meaning to failure, caution, and restraint. To read this instantly, observe resistance to change. When offered a new perspective, does the person engage or shut down? When presented with opportunity, do they minimize or sabotage it? When challenged gently, do they become defensive? These reactions often indicate that suffering is being guarded, not healed. Nietzsche did not shame this. He understood it as survival. But he also warned that when suffering becomes sacred, perception becomes distorted. The individual is no longer responding to the present, they are protecting the past. For the observer, this insight creates distance. You stop trying to convince. You stop taking pessimism personally. You stop mistaking rigidity for realism. You recognize that many reactions are not about you or even about now. This also turns inward, as every truth in this documentary must. Notice where your own perception tightens. The topics that feel settled forever. The conclusions that feel immune to evidence. These are not signs of clarity. They are signs of pain that has become principle. Nietzsche believed growth begins when suffering is no longer allowed to dictate perception. Not by erasing pain, but by refusing to let it define reality. This is the final layer of reading anyone instantly. You are not just observing behavior, you are observing history, compressed, unspoken, active. And once you see how suffering shapes perception, you stop being surprised by human reactions. They are not random, they are remembered. Learning how to read anyone instantly carries a quiet risk. The risk is not arrogance, but distortion. Nietzsche warned that insight without restraint becomes projection, and perception without discipline becomes paranoia. This section exists to prevent that outcome. Because the same tools that clarify human behavior can also corrupt judgment if misused. The first defense is simple but essential. Do not confuse patterns with certainty. Reading people instantly does not mean reaching final conclusions. It means forming probabilities. Drives fluctuate. Context matters. Pressure distorts behavior. A single moment can reveal structure, but it can also mislead if isolated from circumstance. Nietzsche never believed in fixed identities. He believed in tendencies under pressure. To read accurately, you must remain flexible. The moment you believe you fully understand someone, perception freezes and error begins. This is the first protection. Hold insight lightly. The second defense is against projection. Once you learn to see compensation, resentment, obedience, and emotional strategy, it becomes tempting to see them everywhere. Nietzsche would caution against this. The observer's own unresolved drives can contaminate interpretation. Ask yourself regularly, am I seeing structure or am I reacting emotionally? Is this observation calm or charged? Charged perception is rarely accurate. If your reading of someone triggers anger, superiority, or contempt, you are no longer observing. You are participating. Nietzsche believed clarity feels cold, not cruel but quiet. When perception becomes emotional, it is time to pause. The third defense concerns power. Understanding how people reveal themselves can create asymmetry. You may see things others do not. This does not grant entitlement. Nietzsche despised those who used psychological insight to dominate weaker individuals. Not because domination is always immoral, but because it often reveals insecurity masquerading as intelligence. If your understanding of others makes you feel superior, you have misunderstood the lesson. The purpose of reading people instantly is navigation, not control. It helps you avoid traps, set boundaries, and choose environments wisely. It is defensive knowledge, not a weapon. The fourth defense is recognizing when you are being read. This documentary has focused on observation, but observation is always reciprocal. The same signals you now recognize are visible in you: your speech patterns, your judgments, your emotional reflexes, your relationship with authority and kindness. If you apply Nietzsche's psychology outward and not inward, it will destabilize you. Watch for moments when you over-explain. Notice which judgments repeat in your mind. Track emotional responses that surface under pressure. These are not flaws, they are signals. Ignoring them makes you readable in the worst way, predictable and unconscious. Nietzsche believed the highest form of strength was opacity through awareness, not secrecy, but containment. When you understand your own signals, you can choose when to express and when to remain still. This is how you avoid being easily read. The fifth defense is restraint in interpretation. Not every display of emotion is manipulation. Not every act of kindness is fear-based. Not every judgment is resentment. Nietzsche warned against flattening complexity into cynicism. Human psychology is patterned, but it is not mechanical. The difference lies in consistency. True psychological signals repeat. They surface across contexts. They appear under different pressures. Single data points mislead. Patterns reveal. If you cannot identify a pattern, suspend judgment. The sixth defense is knowing when not to read. There are moments where reading others serves no purpose. Casual interactions, intimate vulnerability, situations where analysis would interfere with presence. Nietzsche did not advocate constant detachment. He advocated awareness when stakes exist. Reading is a tool. Tools are not meant to be used constantly. The final defense is ethical distance. Understanding people does not obligate you to fix them, expose them, or confront them. Often the wisest response is silence, not because silence is power, but because interference would create unnecessary friction. Nietzsche respected distance. He believed not every truth must be spoken, and not every insight must be acted upon. Timing matters. This is where many fail. They confuse insight with action. They reveal what they see too quickly. They attempt to correct others. They expose dynamics prematurely. This is not strength. It is impatience. True perception creates options. It does not demand expression. By this point in the documentary, you should feel something shift. Interactions slow down. Reactions soften. Patterns become visible without effort. This is not hypervigilance. It is literacy. And literacy brings responsibility. You are no longer blind. But you must choose where to look, how long to look, and when to look away. That is how you protect yourself, not only from others, but from misusing what you now understand. There is one conclusion Nietzsche would insist upon if he were listening to this entire analysis. None of this knowledge exists in isolation. The moment you learn how to read anyone instantly, you also learn something far more unsettling. You are constantly being read as well. This is the final psychological truth, and the one most people resist. Human beings do not interact blindly. They interpret continuously, not consciously, not analytically, but intuitively. Long before words are processed, signals are registered. Tone, timing, posture, restraint, urgency. These are the real language of human judgment. Nietzsche understood that the most dangerous illusion is believing that interpretation is rare. It is constant. Every time you speak, you reveal what you protect. Every time you judge, you reveal where you are wounded. Every time you emote, you reveal what you need. Every time you comply or rebel, you reveal your relationship to power. These signals do not wait for permission. They are visible whether you acknowledge them or not. This is why self-knowledge is not a moral luxury in Nietzsche's psychology. It is survival. Without it, you are not private. You are exposed without awareness. To read others without reading yourself is to become unbalanced. You see patterns everywhere, but refuse to locate yourself within them. This creates arrogance, rigidity, and ultimately misjudgment. Nietzsche believed the rarest individual was not the smartest, the strongest, or the most dominant, but the most contained. Containment does not mean suppression. It means alignment. What you feel, what you think, and what you express are no longer at war. This is why those with containment are difficult to read, not because they hide, but because they do not leak. Their speech is measured because nothing urgent is being defended. Their emotions are steady because they are not bargaining for response. Their values are quiet because they are embodied, not advertised. They do not perform identity, they inhabit it. This documentary was never about turning you into a manipulator. Nietzsche despised manipulation born of weakness. It was about removing naivete, about seeing human behavior clearly enough to stop being controlled by it, emotionally, morally, socially. When you understand how people reveal themselves, you stop chasing approval. You stop being hypnotized by outrage. You stop confusing volume with truth and kindness with safety. And when you understand how you reveal yourself, something deeper happens. You begin to choose. You choose when to speak instead of reacting. You choose when to remain silent without fear. You choose which values to live rather than announce. You choose which emotions to honor and which to observe. This is the quiet power Nietzsche pointed toward, not domination, but sovereignty. The paradox is this: the more aware you become of human psychology, the less you need to use it. You are no longer pulled into every dynamic. You are no longer compelled to correct, convince, or confront. You see, and seeing is often enough. Nietzsche once suggested that maturity is reached when a person stops needing to explain themselves, not because they are right, but because they are whole. Explanation is a form of negotiation. Wholeness requires none. This is where the documentary ends, not with technique, but with orientation. Reading anyone instantly is not about speed. It is about depth. It is about recognizing that beneath words and emotions lie patterns shaped by drives, suffering, and survival. Once you see those patterns, you cannot unsee them. But the final discipline is this: do not weaponize what you see. Use it to choose environments. Use it to set boundaries. Use it to remain calm where others escalate. Use it to avoid being consumed by conflicts that were never about truth. And above all, use it to refine yourself. Because the most powerful position in any interaction is not control, it is clarity. And clarity, once achieved, does not announce itself. It simply remains.